Hello, everyone. Welcome to LGIU's Fireside Chat. I'm Jonathan Carr-West. I'm Chief Executive of the Local Government Information Unit. And this is a new series of programmes we're doing where we're going to be joined by guests from around the world to discuss what the future holds for local government, with an emphasis firmly on what the sector can do now to start preparing for that future. Now, today, we're sitting down with Professor Donna Hall. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, once described Donna as a public service pioneer. She's had a hugely influential role in shaping the local government and public policy landscape. And deservedly, she has the acclaim to show for it. Her innovation in public service garnered her a CBE. If you're not in the UK, that's a Commander of the Order of the British Empire. It's an honour. It's sort of awarded to people to recognise their public service. Donna's had key positions in a whole range of organisations. She was previously chair of the think tank New Local. She's been integrated care system advisor to NHS England. She's an honorary professor at the University of Manchester. She's chair of a social enterprise called Possibilities. She's been non-exec advisor to several big consultancies and to Birmingham City Council. And all of that, not to even mention her 8 years as chief executive of Wigan Council. It was during that time that she oversaw the development of the Wigan Deal, which is a hugely well-known and highly regarded citizen-led approach to health and care. So Donna's work has had a sort of ripple effect across the sector, local government sector, and across local communities and the wider public sector, and has inspired even more fundamental transformation in public service delivery and community engagement. So we are super excited to welcome Donna here to the Future Local Lab, and to get this opportunity to chat with her about what it takes to transform local government for the future and the courage we need in local leadership right now to get that ball rolling. So Donna, welcome.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks very much for inviting me.
No, we're delighted that you're here. So Donna, that's a whistle-stop tour of your career, but let's take a second to go right back to the beginning and talk a bit about your start in local government. Where did your interest in local government come from? How did you begin your career?
I had no idea what local government did when I left university, I'll be honest, Jonathan. And I went to Leeds University and I was, as many people were in the 80s, struggling to find work. And eventually found work at Leeds City Council on something called a community programme. So I started there in HR, human resources and organisational development. Although it wasn't so PC in those days, I was based in the sickness and disciplinary office where people had to ring in before 10 o'clock if they were off sick. And I had to kind of write it down on a big piece of paper. We didn't have spreadsheets in those days, just a big piece of paper. And in my job description was must empty and thoroughly clean the ashtrays every morning because people smoked in offices, which
that makes it back there, doesn't it?
In the Merrion Centre, yeah, right at the top floor of the Merrion Centre in the centre of Leeds. But that's how I got into it. And I really got, and being in HR and OD, I really got to see the whole council, the entirety of all the different things, all the different aspects of what a council does. And that was it. I kind of stayed with it. I've had brief stints in the community and voluntary sector and in the private sector and in the NHS, but keep coming back to local government. That's where my heart lies.
Amazing, Donna. And you went all the way from that top floor, emptying ashtrays, ended up as chief executive of Wigan, where you put in place the Wigan Deal. I think most of our viewers in the UK will know all about that. But for people in other countries, could you tell us a bit about what the Wigan Deal is? You know, what was the inspiration for it, and what's the impact that it's had?
Yeah, so the inspiration was several pieces of work that we've been doing independently in different council departments over a period of a couple of years, and it started in 2011. We'd been doing some work with the fantastic Hilary Cottam, who wrote Radical Help. And Hilary had been doing some work with us in a place called Worsley Mains with 25 families whose children were on the edge of children's social care. And we basically found a pattern emerge with those 25 families that we were spending on average between £250,000 and £500,000 a year per family every single year. And at the end of each of those years, and this had been going on for generations, at the end of each of those years, the family were either in the same position or in a worse position. And we realised that 80% of our efforts, staff time and money was spent on assessment and referral. different aspects of services with different eligibility criteria. So mental health services, drug and alcohol services, housing, criminal justice, everything, DWP. And we realised between us as a partnership that this had to stop. This is where all our money was going, on assessment and referral. So rather than starting with a person and building support around them, we were spending all our time individually passing people between the different bits of the state. So that was one element. We also had to save a huge amount of money. We had to save around 160 million. We ended up saving more than that. We were the third worst affected proportionately council in the whole of the UK at that time.
It's probably worth, just for overseas viewers and people who are earlier in their careers, reminding people that this was what was going on in local government at that time in England.
Yeah, so a huge period of austerity, huge period of cutbacks with the coalition government and then the Conservative government, which started off by removing elements of deprivation from the funding formula, which meant that poorer councils, particularly councils in the north, but not exclusively, were massively impacted by the funding formula and ended up having a huge amount of their money taken away. So we had to make this huge saving. And then the third element was work that we were doing with Nesta on a Creative Councils project, which was with adult social care. So we've got the children's social care experiment with Hillary in Worsley Mains, and we had the adult social care experiment in a place called Scholes, which is again another deprived part of Wigan. So all these three things combined, I'm a person, my background's policy and strategy, so I can't help but join the dots between different things. I can't help it. And so we decided we were going to create something which was a social contract, which was to look at a different way of delivering public services in partnership with citizens. So rather than the state being the authoritarian, paternalistic thing that it often is, and Wigan's always been a good council, but quite a paternalistic one. And so we wanted to change that. So rather than seeing citizens as passive recipients of services who just pay the council tax, hopefully, we saw them as actors in the place, real members of the community who could help to get through this period of austerity that was impacting not just us in Wigan, but everywhere. That was the kind of heart at the heart of it. And the impact, we made the savings more than we needed to. We ended up adding an additional 7 years of healthy life expectancy in the most deprived wards, which was remarkable.
That's an astonishing story, Donna. And I like, you talk about joining up the dots, but your starting point is the individual. I mean, it's a person-centric approach. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about how you think, so you did that across children's services, adult social care, all those different bits of council activity. But do you think there are wider lessons for the broader public sector about that person-centric approach?
I think people use the word person-centred in a very loose way, but when you actually look at services and, if as a chief exec, you go and sit on customer service desk, or you go and sit in a food bank and you listen to the stories that people tell you, we are not person-centred at all. We've still got a huge way to go. We don't start with the person, we start with the service very often, and we start with a deficit model that you have to prove to me that you can access this service that I've designed without your input, but you have to meet all of my eligibility criteria. So I do think this is a model that could be applied to the criminal justice system. It could be applied to DWP. You see some of the amazing work going on in Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham's Live Well centres, where he's taken a person-centred approach to employment and skills, repurposing job centres as Live Well centres. So rather than just looking at employability without thinking about health, mental health, and physical well-being, and the wider support that people have in place, and housing.
So you talk very clearly about how we could apply it to other bits of the public sector. I guess I'm also interested in the sort of the time dimension of this. This is our future local lab. You started that work, nearly 15 years ago, I guess, in Wigan. But do you think it's applicable in exactly the same way now, or do you think as we look to the future, are there aspects of that you would change, or do you think that actually that person-centric approach is still effectively unfinished business in public services?
I completely agree, Jonathan. It's hugely unfinished business. And you see people trying it in little bubbles. So you see the incredible work of Mark Smith in Gateshead. He's moved on, partly because, it's so difficult to get the traction across the NHS, across DWP, across housing. But Mark is he is a real pioneer of a person-centred approach. But people find it really difficult to do because we've been trained in this school of new public management for so long that people find it so hard to break away from that, and they commission chunks of services in silos away from the person.
Right. And I guess maybe that's an answer to my next question. But you talk about it happening in bubbles, and I think one of the things that I observe across public services is that we're great at piloting things, and people do really amazing, innovative projects here and there, but they never become the new normal, and we rarely stop doing the old way of delivering. And so you end up with what I sometimes call pilot purgatory, where we're just endlessly piloting things, and then people like me write about them and say, oh, look at this amazing thing, and we share them through networks like LGIU, but they never mainstream. What's the barrier to that?
That's a fantastic $1 million question there, Jonathan. I've spent my whole life doing regeneration and policy projects in areas. So single regeneration budget, public service agreements, city challenge, all of that amazing stuff. Urban programme, I'm really old. But what you see is when the money runs out, it stops. So my whole life, I've been really committed to not having pilots and having a clear strategy, which I think is what this government needs for public service reform, is a clear strategy which overarches every aspect of public service, to start with the person. I think what stops it is individual leaders just clinging onto their little silo and the ego of those leaders. I think the Westminster system doesn't help, which is very centralised but very separate when it comes to departmental grip on issues. I think it takes brave leaders, and mayors, particularly mayors, I think are showing some real initiative here with this kind of thing, because they're away from the Westminster system. They can, with devolution and with the white paper, they will be able to just do it. And as Mark Smith says very often, a lot of this stuff we don't need devolution for. We can do it on Monday.
Right.
So it's courage. I think it's courage, Jonathan, and a kind of moral courage.
That's really interesting. And we still see, don't we, a bit of an addiction to sort of managerialism and sort of, as you said, public, even though no one talks about new public management explicitly anymore, it still kind of echoes through the way in which we run institutions, run organizations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And people find it so hard to break away from, because we're measured at becoming better at doing the wrong things.
Right.
The NHS, classic, people going into A&E every single day for years. And because the KPI is being seen within 4 hours, because if you measure the wrong things, you do the wrong things.
Yes. Was it, who is it? Was it Peter Drucker who said, you can only manage what you can measure? Although I'm also fond of quoting Einstein, who said the things that really count can't be counted.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think there's something in that as well. It's about having that leadership and that vision. So actually, what really matters here? What are the things that we really want to move forward on? I want to talk a bit more about leadership and your experience of it and your practice of it and your reflections upon it. But just to sort of round off, I think it's really interesting when you talk about the Wigan Deal that you don't shy away from the financial aspects of it. And you're very clear that it was a better way of doing things, but it also did save money, and it helped you to, you had spending reduction targets that you had no choice about, like every other council. You had to deliver on those. And I do think that let me put it as a question. Do you think that sometimes it's anxiety? People are so focused on the fact they have to cut costs that they don't try and innovate because they see those as alternatives. You either do exciting innovation or you cut costs, but you can't do both. Did your experience, you're just reflecting on the Wigan Deal, how do you think people can sort of square that circle?
Yeah, I think we've got to get out of as I said in the article I did for you just before Christmas, we've got to get ourselves out of this tepid bath of managed decline. It's not our job as leaders or as frontline teams in public servants to manage decline. It's our job to reimagine the future. This is brilliant that you're doing this future lab, because I think that's what's needed. It's that imagination, it's that courage, it's that conviction, and it's understanding that new public management is a busted flush. It was invented in the 80s. It's not just the way that everything should be. We need to bin it and start again. Start with a community, person-centred approach.
Brilliant. And you wrote a great article for us about how to make change happen. And I do recommend that people go to lgiu.org to read that, because it's really interesting. So, that courage, that vision. Tell me, what does leadership mean for you? Because again, I guess there are some quite old-fashioned ideas about leadership that echo around this, and I worry sometimes that as we move towards more, you mentioned mayors, and mayors are, I agree that mayors can be really powerful, but there's also a danger that they can sort of be seen in the sort of heroic leadership model of, so you just need that one person, normally a man, who's going to sort of step in and fix everything. And I don't think that's how you think about leadership and talk about leadership. Can you tell us a bit more about how you conceive it?
Yeah, I think leadership is the biggest lesson I've learned being a chief exec and a leader generally is that it's about giving people the permission to innovate, the freedom to innovate, and trusting them and backing them to come up with great ideas. Frontline teams can see where organisations are going wrong. They can see the gaps. They can see the £500,000 a year family that needn't be in that position. They know it, but they can't do it because the system only measures them on their organisational loyalty rather than their loyalty to the community, to the place, to the person. So I think that's the barrier. But I think empowering frontline teams to work in a creative, imaginative way costs less because we're spending all our money on assessment and referral. And that's why when people say they want more money, I kind of think, well, do you really need more money? Because just think where the money's going now. Listen to people with lived experience. Listen to your frontline staff. A huge amount of the Wigan Deal was listening to staff and listening to residents.
Tell me a bit more about that, though, because you talk about, so leadership is about allowing the conditions for innovators to flourish, for disruptors to act. And you talked about that, as you said in the article, you're pulling the plug out of that tepid bath. But what does that mean in practice? So I guess, I see a lot of leaders who say, yes, we give permission to people to fail and experiment. Is it just about giving people permission, or do you have to get down into some of the, because I always wonder, we like to try things and fail. Well, actually, how does your appraisal system work? How does your actual management of people's careers work? How do you actually instantiate those values? I just wondered, can you say a bit about what, in practical terms, if I were a leader in a local authority saying, yeah, I want to do that, and I thought I did do that, but actually, what do I need to do other than just saying it? How do I do it?
Yes, that's a really good question, Jonathan. And a lot of, as I said, a lot of what we did was listening. It was HR and OD, going back to my Leeds City Council roots. It was structured events to get people to listen more to frontline teams. And the leader would come out with me and the management team and the cabinet, and we would listen to frontline staff. That had never happened before. They were almost like, you would never ever see the leader of the council or the chief exec. And it wasn't just a flash in the pan one-off. It was all the time. Every 2 weeks we did it, and with communities. So it's building that trust and that relationship. It's taking on board really amazing ideas. We had an asset-based appraisal system, which was strengths-based, looking at what people could do differently. We spent loads of time on something that won all sorts of CIPD awards, but a B Wigan experience around values and behaviours, not just in the council, but across the NHS. It's all part of the entire workforce.
Yeah. But I think that's so interesting because, yeah, exactly that HROD background. Because a lot of that stuff, it's not so sexy, right? It's not about standing up and sort of it's about listening. It's about, I guess, sitting with some quite uncomfortable moments, some quite uncomfortable truths from people, and being open to that and authentic about that. And that's sort of hard slog, not just great vision, right?
I think it's a blend of your vision comes from the deep engagement with your staff and with citizens. That's where the vision is created. I think the whole idea of having a deal, a social contract, you're moving away from that parent-child transactional relationship. You're moving into more of a partnership. Let's do this together. One of the elements of the deal was tell us when we get it wrong. Tell us when we get it wrong, because we're not perfect, and that's quite a difficult thing to say for a council, isn't it? We do get things wrong.
So there's a combination of vision, but also humility, of telling stories, but also listening, of taking, there's some interesting sort of, almost sort of opposites that you have to hold at the same time, of acting fast, but also taking your time to listen. And I guess it's about being open to that, the fact that you are having to operate on multiple levels at once.
Yeah, when the King's Fund came into Wigan to do an evaluation of what we'd done and how we'd done it, and they did it They spent a good few months living there to kind of understand how it worked. They spoke to residents, they spoke to staff and partners. And what they said, it was clarity of purpose, what you were there to do. So the deal is dead simple. People overcomplicate strategy. It's really simple. So clarity of purpose and then constancy of purpose. And one of their researchers said the way that it's been done is amazing because you've got a bold humility. And I quite like that, so it's a bold, you actually act and you act on what you've heard and you act on, you're very challenging of the existing new public management system. One of our values was courage. You've got to have courage to try new things. Because if we carry on doing what we've always done, we'll just get the same results, which are not working for people.
Yeah.
But I like that bold humility.
Yes, no, I like that. That's a neat two-word encapsulation of what I was struggling to say. So it's really good, isn't it? Bold humility. You talked about people, of all of this starting with people. But I wonder if you could say a bit more about the relationship, because it's also about place, right? So it's the Wigan Deal. It's about the people in that place. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you see local government as a sort of place shaper, a place leader.
Yeah, I think this is with the white paper. I think this is absolutely essential. And, I know there'll be lots of people really worried about what it says in the white paper.
For viewers not in other places, in the UK, we've just the English government, well, the UK government has just released for England a devolution white paper setting out quite ambitious plans to roll out elected mayors and to end two-tier local government across England.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think this is a real opportunity to not just talk about structures and, the average size has got to be over 500,000 and the governance, because that's what happened with integrated care systems, isn't it? They spent 2-3 years talking about governance and structures and committee meetings, and they've not actually done anything. I don't think a single one of them has. I'm sorry.
No.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't
No,
think any of them have made a difference.
it's the British disease, though. We rush to structure and we
Yeah.
start arguing about structures before we've thought about purpose or function.
Exactly. So I think purpose is really essential in these new authorities. And I think carving out a new purpose, which is to enable the best possible lives for citizens rather than it being around the structure and also the culture. So I think purpose and culture should come before these structural discussions, because I think it's going to mean that we stop talking about public service reform. I mean, there was hardly a mention of reform in the white paper. It was all about growth. There was hardly a mention about communities. We need a community-powered future.
Yeah.
We've had, as the community paradigm, new local publication said, we've had the state paradigm, we've had the market-driven paradigm and new public management. What we need now is a community paradigm.
Yeah, yeah. And what does that mean for? So if we took that, if we started there and said, look, it's about people, it's about place, it's about community, it's about think culture. If we were to really live that, how does that change what a council is as an organizer, as an institution? What does I guess what we're interested in this series is what does the council of the future look like, and how do we start preparing it? What would be your kind of, I guess, ideal vision? If everything went well, what would councils look like? How would they be different in 20 years' time?
I think they would start with the person on everything that they did. They would have a different relationship with citizens. It would be much more of a partnership. Democracy wouldn't just mean elections where you're voted in every 4 years. It would mean citizens' assemblies. It would be, how do you listen to the voice of the person with lived experience when you're designing a service? Because if you don't, you'll end up doing the wrong service. You'll end up designing something that just doesn't work. It's a huge, expensive waste of money. So I think really being courageous about the end of new public management and thinking, right, what is the future that's going to replace it? What is a community powered council? What does it look like? And how can I play a part in it? And having integrated neighbourhood teams, I think, are essential, Jonathan. So you've got the police, you've got the housing, DWP, fire and rescue, and social workers all working together around individuals and families with a plan.
And then you start to build the governance out from that,
From that,
rather than coming the other way around. Do
yes.
you think, just this week we saw the latest in a series of reports kind of about how young people are a bit disillusioned with democracy, and the latest research Channel 4 did, saying that more than half of young people think it would be better just to have a strong leader who could get stuff done, and there's been a lot of this comes up quite often, and part of you thinks if young people are disillusioned with democracy, who can blame them? I mean, what's it delivered for them? But do you think that sort of institution would start to address some of those issues and would start to, we have seen a crisis in trust in democratic institutions. We have seen a growth in populism. We have seen increasing political polarization. Is the sort of institution you describe, does it work to address those issues as well as the public service delivery one?
Absolutely. I think something that is based on building trust needs to treat people with respect, and people have not been respected because they've been transacted with since the 80s. And I think that is at the heart of this problem, is the problem of new public management doesn't work. And what we've tried to do is just continue to make it work better, but it fundamentally is flawed in its design because it's a transactional, market-driven model, and it doesn't take account of the individual circumstances of people. I remember Andy Burnham did some work with young people in Greater Manchester. It started a couple of years ago when he did a survey to find out what they really thought and what they felt about. Did they have hope? And a huge proportion of them, I can't remember the exact figure, didn't have any hope for their own futures.
Yeah.
That's where we're starting from. The people have lost hope and they've got no confidence in the systems that are meant to propel them forwards. And so you get a strong leader type person come forward and people gravitate towards them. But I think it's about building up the confidence of a place. And that's what the place shaping role should be, so that people have great confidence. Our corporate strategy at Wigan was confident people, confident place. We're starting with that.
So you're constantly interweaving the people and place.
Yes.
That's really helpful, and that in turn, I guess, that builds resilience because people are not. It's not a parent-child relationship. It's not a sort of communities are becoming more self-actualizing, self-confident, self-capable.
Yeah, definitely. We also put a huge amount of money, around 12 million, into the community and voluntary sector to kind of provide the social and kind of the social connections and the infrastructure that we'd previously just kind of paternalistically given them very small amounts of money and not trusted them, then micromanage them with that money. This is the kind of state of the way that we don't trust the community and voluntary sector. We're seeing they're viewed with suspicion, even by elected members, and they're not seen. So we just said, right, we're not going to micromanage you. We trust you to deliver. And in return for that, we had 500 amazing new projects, and they were just incredible. And it's those projects that added the 7 years of additional healthy life expectancy.
Which is, I mean, that's huge, isn't it?
It's massive, yeah. And that's in the most deprived parts of the borough.
And we haven't, we know that, and again, this may be a surprise to people from us, there are still parts of England where, the difference in healthy life expectancy between the most deprived areas and the least deprived areas in the same region can be up to 20 years. I mean, there are extraordinary health inequalities still very, very persistent. You mentioned elected members, just sort of briefly. How do they play into this? What's the role of the elected member in this sort of endeavour, and how is it evolving?
Absolutely essential. Particularly the work that they do within their wards, as well as their strategic work if they're involved in scrutiny or cabinet role. But street surgeries, going into communities, having conversations with citizens, and then being a kind of conduit and a channel to bring those ideas and those views back. I think this people-powered approach to local government, it puts the elected member right at the heart of it. I think I've been to talk at some events where some of the councillors of all parties are really quite suspicious of a really community-focused council. They see it as their job to be the community voice, whereas I think they are to a certain extent, but I think there are some people who don't vote. Something like 27% of people would vote in Wigan. So there's a huge amount of people. Yeah.
And that's, again, for overseas listeners, that's pretty typical. I mean, in most local elections, we get around 30% of people voting. I mean, I remember, it takes me right back to one of my very first jobs in the sector was talking to councillors about community empowerment back in the Hazel Blears days. And back then, most of them were just, no, that's not a thing. We're elected, we decide, we don't believe in that. But I think we have moved a huge distance since then in terms of how councillors see their role.
Thankfully, yes. And I think we've got a new kind of breed of councillors who very much see themselves at the forefront of a community leadership type role, really, and to be the mirror for their communities, to kind of reflect the views of the community.
And they're enablers and amplifiers, not
Absolutely.
deciders.
Yes.
Thinking back on the Wigan deal, is there anything you would have done differently? Anything you either think you got wrong or you wished you'd done more of? Or
I think I would have moved quicker in certain areas. So I think this is the first ever Met job I'd ever had. I've worked in districts where we did something called the Chorley Smile, which was a very similar type of social contract, but obviously without the major children's and adult services. So I was a little bit cautious with children's. Adults were absolutely amazing and there's chomping at the bit to go forward with the deal. Brilliant ideas. And lots of the innovation came from the frontline social workers. But with children's, because of the kind of high risk nature of children's services and also the regulation with Ofsted and CQC and all of the kind of, it's quite scary if you get something wrong. So I had some resistance in some aspects of children's services that I didn't tackle early enough because I was a bit cautious. But then I wish I had, because when we did tackle it, all this amazing energy in children's just came out there. It was brilliant.
I mean, that's so interesting because you talked about courage earlier, and as you say, the stakes are so high in something like children's services. If you get it wrong, the results are potentially so horrific and catastrophic that it does require real courage to sort of push through innovation. But we also, as you said earlier, we know that the evidence of current failure is also very compelling. And if we don't do things differently, nothing will change.
Absolutely. And I think with, Josh McAllister's care review from a couple of years ago just pointed how broken the system is in every local authority. And it's not the fault of the local authority, it's the system itself, which is fundamentally flawed. And as a classic case study in bad new public management, as Josh said, we've stumbled into a system which is not about the child, it's about protecting the safety of the professionals in that child's life rather than the child. And we've got to completely, if ever there was a need for a changed system, it's children's services.
Yes, I mean, on every level, in terms of outcomes, in terms of cost, in terms of the impact, and it's knocking local authorities over financially. We have a bad system that we can't afford. It's the worst of all worlds.
Absolutely.
Donna, to bring us to a conclusion, I was just thinking, I mean, not to get too this is your life about it, but just sort of reflecting on your sort of whole career, all the way from that first job in Leeds. You've moved all the way through local government and other bits of the public sector. If you had to distill a sort of a core lesson from your career to communicate to others, so a piece of advice for someone who's starting out now, they won't be emptying ashtrays like you had to do, but there are loads of amazing young people coming into to local government, loads of amazing leaders at every level. What's your advice for them?
I think that's a really great question. I'm glad you wanted to end with that one, Jonathan. I think I wrote in the article again just before Christmas about one of the key things we need to do to make change happen is to attract young people into local government, to make it a really compelling career choice, and not one that people want to change the world. They join local government for a couple of years and then they realise it's really quite bureaucratic, it's quite slow moving, and they can't make change happen. So, I want people to come into local government and be dead excited a couple of years in and want to stick with it and really have ambitions for themselves and for the place that they work and for their ideas to be listened to. I think very often people get dismissed when they're at the start of their career, but I think some of the best ideas I ever had were when I was younger. Probably yourself as well. So I think really valuing that expertise, that passion that young people have when they come in, and giving them a kind of, getting them out into communities to really do a bit of anthropological, ethnographic research themselves to understand it's not just about policy in a vacuum. This is about real life, really making change happen, and back them, give them that courage. We all know that if we have somebody who backs us at work, we do a lot better. So really back them and sponsor them.
And of course, local government is one of the places where you can close the feedback loop, right? You can see the impact of the things that you're doing and that you're thinking about and the ideas you have. They don't all kind of happen off somewhere off stage. You can actually see what difference you're making to communities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's the best career. It's the best career for anybody. It's there's so many different bits of local government, and every little bit is impacting on people's lives. So it's so vital, and it's so diverse, and so much about the place and the community. So there's nothing like it. It's brilliant.
Donna, if you had to sum up your aspirations for the future of local government in 3 words, what would those words be?
I think I'm going to use bold. I'm going to use humble. And I'm going to use courageous. I know bold and courageous are quite similar, but I think we've got to just accept new public management is it is a busted flush and stop trying to make it work. We're wasting our time, we're wasting our money.
Professor Donna Hall, thank you so much for joining us at the LGIU Future Local Lab. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.